views expressed on the following broadcasts do not necessarily reflect those of KHLT, Take 12 Radio, or our affiliates. The opinions on this show should not be considered as medical, psychological, or professional advice and are those of the host, co-host, and guest. Take 12 Radio and KHLT Recovery Broadcasting are not affiliated with any particular 12-step fellowship.
Welcome to Entitled to Overcome, Exploring Solutions for Life Today, a presentation of Take 12 Recovery Radio. And now, here are your co-hosts, Dave Fleming and the Monty Man.
Welcome to the show. Hey, Dave Fleming.
Hey, Monty.
Whoop, whoop, whoop. Yeah. Oh no, we've lost it. Welcome to Entitled to Overcome Solutions for Life Today. Dave is losing it.
I think I done lost it.
Oh my gosh, what a couple of weeks. Thank you for
months, years,
Thank
decades.
you for our listeners for tuning into. We had several more people tune into last week's show, which was actually a repeat of the very first, our debut show of Entitled to Overcome. And I took last week off and dragged Dave down the Takeoff Friday with me. So we didn't do a fresh show last week. And one of the reasons was because I was grieving. And then not just my cat, but just stuff. I mean, sometimes you're bebopping along life and you're dealing with the, as Shakespeare would say, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, and you're doing pretty good. And then something like one of your furry friends passes away and everything becomes, you just get really, your skin crawling and your heart's broken.
The
and
box gets smaller.
Yeah, and somebody walks by you and says, "You look funny," and you start crying.
Or you get angry.
What do you mean? I'll punch your lights on, you sucker. And it's your wife,
Well, yeah, don't go there. Yeah, don't go there.
Which is interesting because we're going to be talking about grief and loss. We did a show on this on Monday's show here a few months ago. And I think it definitely bears talking about it with you, Dave, somebody that works in the field of recovery from addictive illness. Grief is no respecter of people. It happens to everybody. It's just the way it is. But before we talk about grief and loss, we've got, I think, Cecil, do we have some ice-breaking stuff?
Well, I'm certainly glad you asked, because it's time to take some ice and break it. Because, well, it's time for Dave and Monty's Icebreaker.
Ouch!
I think I cut myself.
Did you? Yeah, you got to be careful. We just put a new roof on our porch out here, and a couple of the pieces of that corrugated, whatever that garbage is they used to use, it's made out of fiberglass. I did not realize that. Now it's made out of PVC material, so you don't. And I'm like, what is going on? I got all these bumps on my arms.
Why am I itching?
Oh, it was horrible. Anyway,
well, I saw your post, and that's awesome that you got some friends that stepped up to help you.
Yeah, some Celebrate Recovery guys
awesome.
Came out and did that, which was really, really cool.
We love Celebrate Recovery.
Yes, we do. CR. So I thought this was interesting. This isn't really funny. It's actually kind of cool. A friend of my wife got this.
Kind of like the ice.
Oh, boy.
Sorry, I just had to.
Denver's cowbells. And his goat bell. He's got a goat bell, too. Anyway, a friend of my wife received this notice in the mail from her insurance, her homeowner's insurance policy. And I'm like, it's about time. This was added to my homeowner's exclusion of coverage from State Farm. Important notice. Effective with this policy term, and then it gives the number, exclusion, controlled substances, including marijuana, is added to your exclusion policy. What they're saying here, I won't go into reading all the details, but what they're saying in here now with the legalization of marijuana for recreational purposes, but it is still a federal offense. Okay. If your house blows up because
or burns
down because of marijuana oils or any of that kind of stuff, or you get broken into because you got pot plants and they steal your TV and your computer and everything else, State Farm, as well as all other homeowners insurances, are not going to cover it. And they're letting you know you're out of luck, baby.
So if your grow lights short out and catch your house on fire, you're out of luck.
You're out of luck. And so the items included here, if it has anything to do with resin, oil, or wax, hash, or hemp. So if you've got a sweater vest made out of hemp and you're smoking a cigarette and it catches on fire and burns your house down, sorry. That's just hemp.
Wow. I suppose they could actually figure that out with today's technology.
Probably. Infused liquid or edible marijuana. You see a gummy bear exploding in your mouth, burning your house down. Whether derived from any plant or part of any plant, set forth in paragraph above or not. We do not cover controlled substances as defined by the Federal Food and Drug Administration. So if it's considered a controlled substance federally, doesn't matter if it's legal, they will not cover it.
So, as my brain goes here. I don't know why. So if my house gets broken into,
right?
And they steal all my 80s heavy metal and my TV and my stereo.
Right.
My nice Kenwood. I'm just kidding. I got rid of that.
And his address is?
Right. And they come in and do an inspection or, take a report. And they happen to, there's a marijuana cigarette in my ashtray.
Right.
Does that mean that I can't make a client file a claim?
I think they're going to have to. The burden of proof's going to be. Well, is it going to be on you or the insurance company? I mean, that'd be a strong assumption to say that you having a joint in your ashtray is what prompted somebody to break into your house and steal everything else. But maybe they will try and do that. Insurance companies are ruthless and known for finding loopholes. So.
Well, I mean, does it say anything in there about it being anywhere in your house, or are they talking about being the cause of whatever? No, because they did say if your house gets broken into, and yeah.
So the following definition is added: marijuana means any good or product that consists of or contains any amount of THC or any other cannabinoid, regardless of whether any such THC or cannabinoid is natural or synthetic. This includes but is not limited to any of the following, and then I listed what they were. Coverage. Let's see the following added. However, we do not cover drugs legally. We do cover drugs legally prescribed under federal law and possessed by a person following orders of a licensed healthcare professional. So if you've got a marijuana card. But, I mean, lots of people have marijuana cards that aren't supposed to have marijuana cards, but they have them. I don't know. A liability coverage. The cost of marijuana does not qualify as a necessary medical expense. Section 2, exclusions. The following. Bodily injury or property damage arising out of the use, sale, manufacture, distribution, delivery, transfer, possession, production, planting, growth, cultivation, harvesting, warehousing, processing, or transportation of marijuana or any controlled substance as defined by the Federal Food and Drug Law, 21 U.S.C., section blah, 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 blah. This exclusion does not apply to the legitimate use of legally prescribed drugs under federal law by a person following orders of a licensed care professional. So, a lot of those things that it says it won't cover your home, those things are broad terms. Warehousing, processing, transportation. Could that mean taking your joint from one room to the other? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a little bit.
It's kind of vague.
So if I'm juicing my cannabis,
right,
because I don't want to get high, I just want to get the medicinal qualities,
right,
and my blender blows up and catches my house on fire, I'm kind of
not as long as you have it by a doctor's prescription.
Okay.
Because I'm assuming that's what
even though it says growing, if I'm growing 2 plants to juice,
well, as long as you're growing the legal amount, according to medical, this exclusion does not apply to the legitimate use of legally prescribed drugs.
Okay. Just another loophole.
So what happens if you're, I guess if you're operating a still, because that's illegal. Right? And your still blows up. Are they going to deny your coverage for that? Or is that just kind of, that's just an understood?
Oh, if you have a home brewery kit?
Yeah. Well, people do brew their own beer and wine.
Is legal.
Yeah, but you can't make moonshine. I don't know. But anyway, let me just tell you, if you plan on growing a bunch of pot and selling it and doing all the stuff you're not supposed to do. Then you don't need insurance
because you got all that money. You can just
that's right.
rebuild your house.
And if your house blows up and burns down or whatever, just know this: they're not going to cover you.
Just go out, buy some land and out in the woods, and whatever.
Yay! Listen to this.
I remember how scared I was. I was desperate. I know I was desperate because I wouldn't have called otherwise. I was sick. I was beginning to do things I promised myself I'd never do. There wasn't anyone left who was glad to see me anymore. So I took a chance and called Narcotics Anonymous. You don't have to wait till you're as bad off as I was before you reach out.
Narcotics Anonymous, 800-TODAY-NA. That's 800-863-2962.
Hey there, it's the Monty Man. Did you know that Take 12 Recovery Radio and KHLT Recovery Broadcasting are listener supported? What that means is we don't receive any financial assistance from advertising products or services that have nothing to do with health or recovery, but are supported by you, our listeners. Any other promotions we commit to are purely our way of sponsoring other endeavors we feel are beneficial to the recovery community. Well, one thing we have learned all too well in our second decade of broadcasting is that we receive not because we ask not. Therefore, 3 times a year, we come to you, our listeners, for help. Because we are listener-supported, we depend on your donations to keep us on the air. For over 14 years, our listening audience has helped us to do just that. And once again, we are asking for your support. If you feel that Take 12 Recovery Radio is a valuable part of breaking the stigma of addiction and a resource of recovery from the world's #1 health crisis, we ask that you consider becoming a Take 12 partner. To donate any amount or to sign up for a reoccurring monthly donation, simply visit our website at take12radio.com and scroll down to the bottom of the page and click on the donate button. All proceeds go directly to pay for our expenses to continue to bring you the best in recovery talk and positive music. Won't you consider partnership today? Thank you, and God bless. Welcome back So the Monty Man and Dave Fleming sitting here across from each other talking about grief and loss. Huge thank you to everybody who responded on social media to the question about grief and loss. One of the things, for the most part, about 99.9% of everybody referred to losing somebody to death. There were a couple of losses of grieving their past control issues, or grieving having to pay bills or that kind of thing. But for the most part, didn't you find, Dave, that most of the responses had to do with losing somebody that was close to them?
Yeah, I think that's typical. I mean, that's
Sure.
the first thing we think of when we think of grief and loss. We think of death, someone dying. And so that's, I mean, I had a lot of people respond to, I asked, what is your biggest struggle in long-term recovery? And, 75% of them said death. So which ties into basically how I relate to that is grief and loss, and how do we look at that, and especially in recovery, and how that affects us. You know, whether we got 30 days or 30 years.
Right. And so with over 20 years of sobriety under my belt, the grief and loss I experienced the last couple of weeks wasn't any more pleasant.
Right.
I mean, losing Christy, having to send her off to cross the Rainbow Bridge, that was painful, and it hit me harder than I thought it would. I can understand losing Nala, our dog, hitting me really hard, because I've been, I guess, more interactive with her.
Right.
Cats are kind of independent,
right,
and that kind of thing. But it hit me pretty hard. Yesterday, went out to the crematorium and picked up her ashes, and set her on the dashboard and let her ride home on the dashboard.
That was nice of you.
And I found myself tearing up as I was riding home, and I was like, wow. Well, praise God anyway, but not to minimize losing a pet, but when you're talking about people that you've lost, maybe you've sponsored them, right? Maybe it was your sponsor.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Well, a lot of people, especially like in AA, we try to find somebody that is older than us, that has more experience than us, and as we age, they age, and
it's inevitable.
My buddy, Mike, he was talking about that, and he says they kind of age out. They get to a certain point,
right,
and they pass away. And if we're older, those people that are our sponsors that may be 10 or 20 years older than us, that are that example, they pass on. Sometimes it's hard to wrap your brain around that, because you start looking at, well, man, how many, I've lost all these people. And sometimes it happens in waves. You get the old happens in threes.
Right.
It's weird. I don't understand how that works, but it always seems like there's at least three that are in a row. Some significant death or some kind of tragedy in your life. But it makes you think sometimes. It's like, man, what's going to happen next,
Especially if you're getting up there.
Right.
And you start losing classmates.
Right.
People your own age.
Your mortality. Yeah.
Right. This week also, my cousin who grew up with me, she passed away. She's my same age.
Yeah.
Last year, my sponsor of 28 years, who was also a co-host on this show, Bruce H., he passed away. He was struggling with congestive heart failure and that kind of thing. He was quite a bit older than I was. But you start seeing those people in your life that you're close to, and especially if you're within 10 years, you go, when's my ticket up, right? You start thinking about, and I was thinking about, okay, first thing I need to do is I need to get a new binder out and write down all the passwords and account information to all the radio station stuff, so my wife has it.
Right. Right. Mine's all in code words in case somebody finds my ledger.
Right.
They can't figure it out anyway. So I have to figure out a way to do the same thing so that my wife put it in a safety deposit box or something or teach her how to decipher the code.
You're a certified alcohol and drug counselor. You ought to know about codes.
Jeez.
Bada bing.
There goes the ice again.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I don't know. And since I came into being in recovery, I had to look at other grieving issues or losses. That was that's probably the fourth treatment center I went to. But you started talking about things like that, like the grieving over your addiction,
right?
Because our drug of
to
choice was like our mistress and our best friend, and it was everything.
Darn right it was.
And there is some process in grieving that, especially early in recovery, trying to get through all that. And it's like, this is how we deal with stuff. Now you got to tell me I can't use it anymore. I got to do, the only thing I have to change is everything.
Right. And you may have had a regiment of activities you did from the time you woke up to the time you went to sleep, if you went to sleep. Right, that was surrounded around drug use and that group of people, and people think, well, what's the big deal? You're leaving that behind.
Yeah, you should be happy.
What's the big deal? Right. Well, I know this is going to sound weird, but even when I lived on the streets for 18 years, I made close friends. They weren't healthy friends. They were toxic friends, but to the degree that we were able to, we took care of each other.
Right.
And when I left that world, I didn't understand why I was so hurt inside. But there was a part of me that was part of my life.
Well, it's that you're all sick together and you're helping each other get through that by sharing, right?
Right.
Usually sharing your drugs and alcohol. But it's comforting. And then once you have to break free from that, a lot of times you don't have that same thing in sobriety. You have to be proactive and go out and seek it out.
Yeah.
It doesn't just happen, It's easy to find a bunch of people that want to sit around and get high.
Sure.
But it's not always easy to find people that want to sit around and help each other grow spiritually,
Mm-hmm.
So there's other things that, that I get reminded of that are not death related either, besides, addiction. Loss of opportunity, loss of family, career, lifestyle, internal issues, dignity, self-respect, trustworthiness, integrity.
Yeah.
There's all that. I mean, addiction is just part of it, but I mean, what we could lose our self-respect, our self-esteem, our, trustworthiness.
Our self-worth.
Right. You can go out the window, and having to rebuild that, can take some work. It's worth it though.
So what happens when you're grieving several things at one time? Like some of the listeners wrote, one gentleman, Donald R. He was divorced in recovery, and then he lost his son just 3 years ago. Dave T. was 18 months sober when his younger sister died, and then his mother 2 weeks later. I mean, you get hit, boom, boom. You talk about things happening in three. Sometimes they are directly associated with us,
right? One
after another, after another. In fact, Dave taught me a lot about the staying close to the program in troubled times. Okay. So that's a solution oriented thing, right? I mean, right. You're staying in the middle of the herd. You're not, because what we do oftentimes when we're grieving, when we're angry, when we're hurt or whatever, is we pull back,
right?
Instead of press in.
We don't want to bring everybody else down when we're, whatever.
Right.
And it's, yeah. Well, that's the great thing about being in recovery, at least in my experience, that if I put myself out there and ask for help, I'm going to get the help that I need.
Yeah.
If I don't, it's not going to happen.
People can't read your mind.
Right. And I spent a lot of years isolating because I didn't want let people into my bubble to really know what's going on.
What were you afraid of?
I wasn't afraid of anything. The issue I had is I didn't trust anybody. There's probably some abandonment issues.
So were you afraid of being betrayed?
I think there's probably some of that.
Because abandonment issues they're powerful things.
Well, and it's, not having anybody else besides myself.
Right.
To take care of things.
Yeah.
The old, if everybody would just do things my way, everything would be fine. A little, little controlling,
well, I know
self-centered.
That's true for me.
Maybe some narcissism, but it worked for a long time. It's like if I fell into that. It may be a generational thing, but it's like if you want something done right, you got to do it yourself because no one is really else is going to care whether or not it gets done or not. So why waste all that time and ask somebody to help? Then you have to go and fix it.
Right.
Right. You might as well just do it yourself and get it over with.
And that usually comes from experience of people letting you down, not following through, thinking they know what they're, everybody knows the guy that was going to fix your car and then he got under the hood and he ruined everything. It's just like, you know what? Just leave me alone. Let me deal with my life on my own.
Well, yeah. And it made things a lot easier,
So what changed?
Well, it's kind of that caveat, whereas if you don't ask for help, you kind of protect yourself. But the problem is you can't grow and you can't change unless you do ask for help. But you're limited on what you can do, right? It's kind of like leaning on your own understanding. It's going to only get you so far.
Right.
I mean, I suppose you could, I've got books. I read tons of books and I haven't read probably a tenth of them. But they look good on my shelf, and
Sure.
It's like the whole knowledge thing. It's like you can have as much knowledge as you want,
right.
Even if I read them all, but it doesn't mean anything if you don't apply it. It's the same thing with working the program. You can have all the information, you can know what to do. You can even recite the Bible backwards and forwards, but if you're not putting it into practice, it isn't going to do you any good.
You can teach everything out of the big book from cover to cover and have no clue on applying and implementing it in your life. But you're a great teacher, and people say, wow, that guy's a great sponsor. He's this and he's that. And they may never know that you're miserable inside.
Well, I think it comes out.
Eventually, right?
It comes out. You can't do any program by just telling somebody how to do it. You have to have to lead by example.
Yeah.
It comes out no matter what you do.
So when we're grieving, there's actually a cycle, right?
Yep.
Share that with us.
There's some of you may be familiar with this person, this Swiss psychiatrist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote a book on death and dying in 1969. She outlined the phases of grieving as follows. Denial is number one. Right? We try to dismiss the brutal reality. It's just a natural defense system that helps us ease the first wave of emotional pain.
This isn't happening.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're just kind of, you ever think about being numb, right? It's like, sometimes you don't have any emotions, especially if years and years and years and years and years and years and years of drug and alcohol abuse, your emotions are kind of numbed. And sometimes when this happens, when you lose somebody or something, it's almost like being numb. Like you don't show any emotions. There's, some people just don't show emotions. And
people will say, well, they're not really sad.
It wasn't that, yeah, right.
It's not that big of a deal. So I'm wondering this because the day following Christy crossing over the Rainbow Bridge, I came into the studio and I looked over to where she usually laid that night, and I said, "Good night, Christy girl." I wonder if that, in a kind of a way, was a form of denial because I was very early in the process.
Sure, yeah.
In my head, she was kind of still there,
right?
But she wasn't.
It's that that disbelief, like
And And it soothed me. It soothed me to say that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I, just act as if she'll just be there.
Magically appear.
She'll be. That was just her 8th life, right? Now she's got one more.
Right.
She'll come back. Yeah, it's.
I wonder if when people build shrines, because everybody grieves in different ways, and some people, they'll get rid of everything that belongs to the other person. Some people will hoard everything and sometimes even build a shrine. And I'm wondering if that's a part of it. I wish the psychiatrist was sitting here. I could ask her about that. Right.
Well, I don't know if necessarily they'd call it a shrine, but I guess you could use that term. We had this cat named Mo, short for motel, because that's where she found us.
Okay.
We spent a weekend in a motel, and this cat walked into our room,
right,
and basically never left.
Oh my goodness!
She looked like she had just had babies, and we went to try to find, and we couldn't find it. It looks like maybe somebody just dumped her off. Anyway, so she ended up, becoming our cat, and she lived. We weren't sure how old she was at the time, but she was probably lived 20 years.
Yeah,
and it was my wife's cat. My wife was devastated, and we had her cremated, and we had this little. It was an older house, and it had this little kind of cutout in the wall.
Yeah. Little recessed place.
Yeah, they must have had, I don't know what they had in there, but that became like Mo's spot. We put her, we had a picture of her, and we had her ashes, and then we had these little lights.
Oh, really?
These little battery operated lights that look like candles on either side, and it was comforting. Like Mo's still kind of hanging out and watching out over us, but we had the picture of her where she had this like canopy thing, and it was all
right.
We spoil our animals.
Well, I have, and you'll see it when you leave today. But in the studio, over on the shelf, you can't see it from where you are, but Christy's up there. Sakima, our first dog, which was a large dog, so it's quite a large container. My mother-in-law. I don't know what part of my mother. It might be her big toe. I don't know, but it's not a very big urn. It's just a little tiny thing. And Christy's picture, and so I got this little shelf.
Yeah.
And I was going to take Christy's ashes and spread them over by the tree that she used to lay out. I haven't been able to bring myself to do it yet. But in a way, that's kind of a. I don't know.
Well, it's like
it's healthy, isn't it?
I think so, because it's like your family, right? In your house, you have pictures of your family on the wall,
right?
So what's the difference between having that and pictures of your dog, and maybe a little shelf with their their memorials? I mean,
yeah.
If you're like worshiping it, and you're like,
well, that's a little weird.
That's a little
Or if you're snorting, what was it? One rocker, which will remain nameless, snorted his dad's ashes or whatever. It's a little weird. All right, so denial, then what happens?
So then the second phase is anger, right? We try to blame something or someone. This can include feeling guilty or blaming ourselves for the situation. Guilt is a very powerful feeling that can lead to relapse. Usually the first one is we blame God, right?
Sure.
It's God's fault. If God, if there was
God
a God,
loved me,
right? If there was a God, why would He let this happen to good people? I mean, that's the first thing that everybody.
We hear it all the time. Yeah.
Is anything to like get away from just
the reality,
normal part of life?
Yeah.
Especially if it's a death and it's unexpected, or it's a job and it's unexpected, right?
Sure.
And next, you're everything. You're all, set to, maybe retire in 5 years or something, and you've got all this retirement planned out.
You think the promotion's
and then
coming?
You come to the work. Yeah, you come to work, and they say, they hand you an envelope, and they say, "Sorry, but we gotta lay you off," and you're like, right. And so that's the first thing, maybe after the shockwave wears off, is that you get angry.
You bet.
It's like, what the heck am I going to do now? And how dare they?
Look at all I've done for this organization. What blah blah blah. Pretty soon you got a whole inventory of where they screwed you over, right?
Right.
But a week before that, you're going, I love my job. I love the people I work for. It's just I'm getting a promotion next week. You're all full of praise, and then bam, you get the pink slip.
Yeah, and I think that depends on the degree of how you go through these things.
Sure.
Is based on where you're at in your recovery process or just in the life process.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm sure there may be a few people out there maybe aren't in recovery. I don't know, that have loved ones that are in recovery that maybe listen to the show too, that go through the same exact thing, and it just matters on how healthy you are spiritually, and how you're going to handle these situations. And the next one is number 3, bargaining, right?
Oh yeah.
What if, only if I would have, been there, or if I would have done this, or, if I wouldn't have done that, this would happen,
God changed things, and I will never do this again.
Well, that's the old foxhole prayer, right?
Right.
Just get me out of this one, and I'll never do it again.
Bring them back to life, and I'll be a better dad, or a better son, or yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you bet.
Number 4 is depression, right? Worry about the tangible and practical things, like how we will deal with reality, bills, family and friends, and then personal sadness and heartbreak we experience when losing someone we love and care for. It is feeling of emptiness, a time of loss, grief, and pain. Good example is oftentimes you hear of one spouse passing away, and the second one passes not too long after that one.
Exactly. Yeah.
They talk about dying of a broken heart. Being without their their loved one or their sweetheart, is, especially if you spend a long time with them.
You bet.
It's like, now what? It's like, what do I do?
Right. And it always, my ears perk up a little bit, and I feel for the person whenever I hear somebody say, I can't live without so and so, or they're my one and only. They are number one in my life. Well, first of all, hopefully God's number one in your life, and they're your number 2, not your number 1. But I see this, especially within recovery circles, people getting into relationships looking for that piece to fill only God can fill, and putting their whole life into another person. And that's emotional dependency, not emotional sobriety. Yeah. And then something happens to that person. Perhaps they relapse. Perhaps they die in a relapse. Perhaps Denver and I went and said, we'll see you in 2 years, to a good friend of ours in court yesterday, and watched how his wife and he hugged, and the tears flowing from her eyes. What's she going to do right now? Thankfully, she knows God. She's got a relationship with God. But there are people that go to jail. What do you do? I mean, and this depression thing, do you think in this cycle that when the depression hits, this is perhaps the beginning of experiencing the reality of it all?
Right. Well, that kind of leads into number 5, which is acceptance, right? And not to mistake it with agreements. Last phase of the grieving process, sometimes indicated by a person acting withdrawn, but also very calm. This is not a period of happiness, far from it. It's a period of time when a person accepts the reality and slowly adapts to a new life and starts preparing to move on. When we're talking about the depression and acceptance and whether or not we have a connection with God or not, I think it's important. One of the things that I like to work on with anybody that I work with, either on the job or outside of the job, is look at the balance in your life. Right, you can't have your life can't revolve around one person. You have to have balance. Like you have to have time for yourself. They have to have time for themselves. You have time together. If you have kids, you make time to spend with each one individually. You spend time as a family, but you also have friends on the outside, right? friends and family that you connect with and stay connected with, so that those relationships, you have some kind of relationship outside the family, so you can lean on those people, so you can rely on those people, so you have some backup. Where if we don't have anybody but one person, like, what happens? I know back in my addiction, me and my wife were separated for almost 6 years. And in the beginning it was like, like, now what? Yeah. Right. It's like, it's almost like it's like, what do I do now? I'm like, every part of my being was basically spending time with my wife or my kids.
You feel paralyzed?
I guess that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sit on the couch and stare at the TV and
see. I could fall.
The clock ticking.
I could hit that depression mode and then bounce right back into denial, going, this really isn't. This isn't as bad as it seems. This can't be really happening. I'll call her up and it'll be all right. We'll work it out. Right.
Or thinking that, I'm stronger than this.
Right.
Right. This is, this can't be me. I got things to do. I got people to take care of. I got a job to do. I got a business to run, whatever.
Right.
I got a farm, right? I got all these employees. I got animals. I got crops I got to get out. What do I can't go through this. And so sometimes we get into this, that goes back to the bargaining, which is important to think about. This isn't like a list that you work through. This can be fluid. You can go back and forth.
It isn't necessarily in an order,
right? You can go to depression and then go back to denial, and it's a pretty fluid.
Or experience all of it in one big bolt,
right?
To where it's so overwhelming that it debilitates you and you end up in the hospital.
Right.
I mean, I've seen that happen to people where they're become catatonic.
Yeah, I've seen it. I've had people in my family that they just basically stare at the wall,
right?
Because it's like, what do I do? My comfort zone's gone.
Yeah,
or the person that I lean on or that rely on, my other half is not here anymore, and what do I do? And it can be a scary place. And grief can be one of the major triggers of relapse, right?
Sure.
And you got to think about what we can do to go through that without jeopardizing our recovery. And I think having a strong recovery program, a strong support system, is the first thing. We talk about what I learned in my walk, in my recovery, is when I go to meetings, I got to find a meeting they have a phone list, and there's somebody that is in charge of making phone calls. So if someone doesn't show up to a meeting, or if there's people that haven't come for a while, everybody takes turns in calling those people to say, "Hey, how are you doing? Can I, do you need any help or whatever?" And I think that's important, because then there's that, we don't always like accountability, but it comes into play when these things happen,
right?
And if we practice this, when the things eventually come into play, we're better prepared for it.
Have you ever had that happen where you had to be gone for a period of time for whatever reason, and somebody in your fellowship did call you and say, "What's up, Dave"?
No. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, I went to meetings every day for almost 2 years, and then I was involved in everything. But I think it was because I didn't want that to happen. Now, it's happened to me at church.
Yeah.
Where if I don't show up at church, someone might call me and say, "Hey, what's going on?" I know for me in my program, I had to plug myself into a lot of different things. So I had responsibilities, right?
Right. So
people counted on me. I had to show up.
Okay.
And so that was part of my recovery process. Is typically I would isolate. or I would take on too much and then I wouldn't do it, or I wouldn't show up.
Mm-hmm.
So in changing everything, if I make that commitment, I have to show up.
Right.
I have to be, I have to follow through. And if somebody else falters on their commitment, I have to be willing to step up and cover them, because I would want them to do the same thing for me.
Yeah.
And then try to find out what's going on.
So it's important, I think. Let's just talk for a second about your recovery fellowships, the listeners' recovery fellowships, our recovery fellowships. It's important not to assume that don't assume somebody doesn't want you to call. Don't assume somebody is out maybe using or whatever. I'm not suggesting we chase after people that don't want to be found. I mean, the Big Book talks about, if somebody doesn't want to do this thing, go to somebody else that does. But I have to tell you, in over 30 years of attending 12-step fellowships, I've only one time, and the guy's name was Mike D, called me up and says, haven't seen you in about a month. Are you okay? Right. And he wasn't even a close friend.
Yeah.
But that's one time in all those years.
Right.
And however, where my place of worship goes, I've had people call me on several occasions. But you're right. A lot of it had to do with the fact, hey, you're supposed to open the door, or you're supposed to do this,
right.
You're supposed to do that.
Well, and it's kind of either overtly or covertly or whatever, understanding that if you put your name on the list,
right,
and your phone number, you expect to get a phone call.
Sure.
At some time or another. I've had people call me off the meeting list to ask if they could get a ride.
I've had that
to another meeting, or
sure.
Maybe they needed they know that I work on cars or whatever, and they called up and said, hey, I need help with XYZ, whatever.
Right. I've had plenty of those too. But as far as like anybody checking up on me, nah, not really. And I'm not mad about that or hurt about that. It's just interesting to kind of note, and maybe we could do a little better with that sometimes. I think, there's a story in the Good Book about the shepherd. One little lamb goes off. He leaves the entire group, and he goes out and finds it.
Yep.
Sometimes we need to be. I mean, listen, rabbis, pastors, priests, 12-step GSRs, I mean, whatever. Maybe we could be a little more attentive to the people in our circles and notice, hey, I haven't seen so-and-so's face for a while. And pick up the phone.
Well, we have to practice that in our daily life with everything that we do.
You bet.
I'll give you an example. This just happened yesterday of just, being kind and doing the next right thing, right?
Uh-huh.
We were at Safeway, and they're, the three as a crowd thing, right? They opened up another lane, and instead of, we could have just went in there and checked out our stuff, but we let this one lady go. She was in one of those little
putt-putts,
putt wheelers, disabled. And then there was a kid behind her, and he had like a 2-liter bottle of Mountain Dew, and he's like, go ahead, and we've got, we're going to be 15 minutes. I said, we're going to be about 15 minutes.
Right.
You're like 2 seconds. So you go ahead and go.
Right.
And so he gets up there, and he's short on the amount.
Oh,
and
okay.
So I said, here, let me take care of that for you. So I paid for his soda, and he's like, thanks. And I said, you don't have to thank me, man. Just pay it forward.
Right.
Right. Go.
Right.
Whenever you have an opportunity in the future and you can, go help someone else. And then the lady's like, well, asking the kid, do you play Monopoly? Do you want your Monopoly tickets, right? And he's like looking at her like a deer in the headlights. And I said, hey, man, if you don't want them, I'll take them, because I play the Monopoly game.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah,
and he's like, he goes, no, I don't play the game, but go ahead. Right? And so that was like, kind of leading by example,
sure.
Paying it forward, and
sure.
And so it was neat, and to be able to do that. I was with my wife, so I'm, she's all proud of me and everything.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is
why.
what, but I do it all the time, so it's not like anything that shocks her. But ever since day one of my new life, being with my obsession being removed and being saved. That's how I've had to live my life. I mean, I've been tested all the time.
It almost becomes a natural thing, doesn't it? It's like you feel weird if you don't do that. I mean, it's like I could no more litter now than turn myself into a rock. I mean, it's just not in me. But before recovery, before my relationship with God, I'd throw paper out the window. I wouldn't even think twice about it. I can't bring myself to do it.
Well, we used to have this this radio station in Minnesota, KTIS, and they had this drive-through difference thing going on. And so if you go to like Starbucks or whatever drive-through coffee thing, the idea was you had a thing that they printed out from the radio station that basically, said what you're doing, and you would get your order, and then you would pay for the person behind you.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Or, if you paid with a 20 and there was some money left over, you would say, hey, apply it to the whatever you could do. And and so it was interesting because then people would call on the radio station and share their experience on how that worked. And that was kind of a way that helped people to try to pay it forward, do something for somebody else without even knowing the person.
I had to sneeze.
I thought, man, that's a great idea. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that. And one day I'm driving and God just totally convicted me. Like, go to Starbucks this morning. And I'm trying not to plug Starbucks, but, he says, go do this. And I'm like, yeah, I need to go do that, but I don't have the letter. So I'm like,
right.
And I feel like God's telling me, well, do it anyway.
I'm
like, okay. So I get up there and I get up to the window, and the person in front of me paid for my order.
Oh my goodness.
Right. And I'm just like, wow. Right. So then I'm like, cool. So that they kind of set the stage.
Yeah.
So then I paid for the order of the person behind me.
Yeah.
And, kind of just went on.
Dude, that is this last year in 2017, when I say last year, that happened to me twice in McDonald's.
Yeah.
Where I'd pulled up to pay and they go, oh, that's been paid for. And I'm like, what? I'm looking ahead. I'm trying to say, do I recognize that car? And all this. And I didn't.
Right.
It's a trip. So, what I'm hearing here is, because we believe it or not, we're out of time. What I'm hearing here is if we will pay attention, if we'll be aware of people around us who may be grieving, who may be experiencing loss. Sometimes they don't need a lecture. Sometimes they don't. They just want a handshake. Sometimes they just want to smile. Sometimes they just want to. They want to be asked. Can I help you with anything? I mean, a meal.
Right.
Sometimes if we're just aware, if we'll just reach out, right?
Yeah, and it doesn't take a whole lot. There's people that actually would pay for people's groceries, and you hear stories all the time. It's like, man, I got up there and I realized I didn't have enough money to cover this.
Yeah, and
it just happened that somebody blessed them by paying for their groceries.
Yeah,
I mean, I used to hear stories like that all the time. It was inspiring, and it's like, yeah, this is the stuff that we need to do, right? You need to, anytime anybody is in need, and all you have to, they don't have to ask for it. You just know, you pay attention,
right?
Because I've been that little kid.
Me too.
And I'm like, and not having enough money, and then, well, you got to put it back, right?
Yeah.
And so I know what what that feels like, where you think you have enough to cover it, and you don't.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you. So if you're not grieving, pay attention to the people around you.
Right.
If you are grieving, it's okay to let people know. It may be really hard to do that, but when somebody does say, "Hey, Fred, how you doing?" It's perfectly okay to say, "I'm not doing too well."
Right. Oh, thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
One of my pet peeves is, how you doing? Fine.
Yeah.
How's it going? Fine. It's like, really?
Yeah. It's okay.
It's okay to say that.
To say, right now my life sucks and I'm in a lot of pain, man.
Hey, you know what? If you are gonna put it out there, you should expect to get an answer.
You bet.
I did that in the grocery store one day. The lady said, "Hey, how you doing today?" I'm like, "You really want to know?" It's been the worst day of my life. She looked at me like, "Oh my gosh." Oh no!
I didn't
what
really
have I done? Want you to tell me. But yeah. So be careful what you ask for.
Yeah, there you go. All right. So, interestingly enough, our closing song is by Hilary Roberts, recovery recording artist, a good friend of ours, and it's entitled "Reach Out." Here's Hilary.
Awesome.
She wakes up every morning, going through the same routine, coffee and her nicotine. In her eyes there's a story, a broken home that she's been through, left alone for someone new. And she's in need of a hand that won't let go, a love that she can't see. And you can be the beginning of a change. All she wants is to believe. Reach out, show her there's a lot of love to go around. Yeah, yeah. Reach out, you can make a difference here and now. Oh, if you just reach out. He stands up in the mirror, going out to hit the scene, grabs his coat and takes his keys. In his heart there's a fear, he won't deny the drink again, bottles got a hold of him. He's in need of a hand that won't let go, a love that he can't see. You can be the beginning of a change. All he wants is to believe. Reach out, show him there's a lot of love to go around. Yeah, yeah. Reach out, you can make a difference here and now. Oh, if you just reach out. 'Cause they're in need of a hand that won't let go, a love that they can see. And we can be the beginning of a change. All they want is to believe. Reach out, show them there's a lot of love to go around. Yeah, yeah. Oh, reach out, you can make a difference here and now. Here and now. Oh, reach out. Oh, you know you got to reach. Show them there's a lot of love to go around. Oh, you know. Reach out. We can make a difference here and now. Oh, if you just reach
And that was Hilary Roberts with Reach Out. Until our next broadcast, this is the Monty Man along with my co-host Dave Fleming, and we're wishing God's perfect serenity for you. And remember, because of God's grace, you are entitled to overcome.
This has been a broadcast of KHLT Recovery Broadcasting.